So this morning was the second session of Timothy Eastman's seminar on his new book, Untying the Gordian Knot, Process, Context, and Reality. Is it Process, Reality, and Context? It's probably that way. And there was this point of contention raised by another Whitehead scholar, Randall Oxier. He was in conversation with not only Tim Eastman, but Michael Epperson, who's like a quantum physicist, inspired by Whitehead, and a philosopher and theologian, and then also a mathematician, a Greek mathematician, Elias Zephyros. And they were all talking about possibility, which is the polar complement to actuality. And what they all agree on is that they all agree that... What's going on here?
Maybe they're just meeting up.
Anyways, they all agree that materialism is a form of actualism, which is to say that a materialist views nature as just a bunch of already actualized stuff. A bunch of atoms. Nothing new can ever really emerge in a materialist universe, because it's just the rearrangement of pre-existing parts.
Yeah.
Right? That's actualism. One way of talking about what actualism is. There's no potentia, there's no purpose, there's no aim.
Yeah.
Right? There's no... everything's present. There's no absence. And so they all agree, Eastman, Oxier, Epperson, Zephyros, that actualism needs to be critiqued, and that quantum physics actually is the best critique of actualism or of materialism that you could ask for. And they offer an interpretation of quantum theory that's sort of rendering some of Whitehead's ideas about concrescence into physical, contemporary physics language. But there's this disagreement about... Oxier thinks there's something possible that even God hasn't prehended. There are eternal objects that are beyond even the transcendent being. And he claims that this is Whitehead's position. And I think to some extent, if creativity is beyond God is a creature of creativity, and we think of creativity as the realm of sort of absolute potential, then I can kind of see what he's saying. But at the same time, like, how can you even think about anything beyond what the divine actuality has already made possible by comprehending it? You know, like, we feel in relation to God. We can't feel possibility independent of God.
It seems to me kind of a more abstract way of talking about something that, because I just think like that notion that there's something that God hasn't prehended, to me, like, there's something, it's almost like this conceptual translation of a kind of mystical ascent. And it's like before the gate of the cherubim, you know, into the space of unknowing, before the space of unknowing. So, yeah, I feel like it just is a kind of, at least because I feel like I can resonate with, I guess, what you were saying when you were kind of trying to sympathize, but then being like unsure about that interpretation. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate Whitehead's distinction between creativity and God.
Yeah.
And for Whitehead, God is the principle of limitation. So God is, in a way, kind of finite. I mean, there's an infinite realization of ideal possibility in God. That's God's primordial nature. But God also has a consequent nature, and God is, as a principle of limitation, sort of the filter of creativity that sort of, like a poet, shapes that flow of pure potentiality or chaos into something.
Yeah.
Something definite. And
Mm-hmm.
to make
It's
definite...
the Logos.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and if we didn't have that, we would have nothing. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's just like when it is said, you know, you don't have anything without perception because
Right.
the imagination is involved.
So we don't... Nothing is kind of what's at stake here. Like, is there something to nothing, or is nothing just a lack, just silence, just without any inner structure or dynamic? Or do we only refer to nothing from the perspective of the actual universe?
Well, I feel like the nothing is like the activity of a something.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of how I feel about it. But it's, you know, kind of below, reminds me of Desmond again with the idiotics. It's like below, it's like overdetermined and below, but still, I shouldn't say below, but it precedes and also transcends the perceived, right? Or like the ordered, you know, for comprehension and coherence.
Yeah.
It gives rise to that, but it precedes and is in excess to it as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're running into paradoxes that the German idealists were aware of in trying to talk about the absolute, where language is such that it refers to things, it assigns qualities to things. You know, it has a subject-predicate structure. It predicates nouns, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so we just inevitably, whenever we talk about creativity, we nounify it.
Yeah.
We could do a little bit better by thinking of it in a verb sense as an activity, but still, it gets thingified when we talk about it. And it's clearly not a thing. It's the unthinged. I mean, absolute literally means unthinged.
Yeah. I guess the way I think about it is that it becomes a subject. You know?
Uh-huh.
I feel like that's really the natural move. But maybe with, I guess, the kind of polarization of subject and object, you know, more intensely, it's also become a thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the subject object with a dash or hyphen.
Yeah, it's like the objective idealism.
Yeah. And that's why Eckhart or Schelling in his own idiom would say, like, you know, Eckhart would say that the eyes through which God sees us, or the eyes through which we see God, are the eyes through which God sees us. Or, you know, Augustine put it in a slightly more gnomic sense, that God is closer to myself than I am.
Yeah.
God is more intimate to me than me.
Yeah.
And Schelling would say, you know, when we know the absolute, we are the absolute knowing itself.
Yeah.
Right? There's no split between a subject and object anymore. And so there is a kind of mystical or contemplative, intuitive participation in that which is being spoken of. I mean, when you utter the Logos, unless you're swearing, unless you're taking the name in vain, when you utter it, you're participating in it.
Yeah.
You are an expression of it.
Yeah. But this in relation to the conflict or the debate?
Yeah, well, that's why I think there was an attempt by the various panelists and, you know, their own brilliant ways to try to, I think, logically determine the structure of possibility.
Okay.
And in Whitehead's scheme, the realm of eternal objects or of pure potentials is given structure or order or value and valence by God. That's God's role in the primordial sense. And so is it something that humans can conceptually grasp with logic? Or is it something that humans have to partake of in a more mystical sense, which would have a moral and aesthetic and a spiritual dimension, as well as a truth dimension? of like being logically justified.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like there's like a philosophical argument going on among these brilliant minds, but in order to grasp what they're actually talking about, it would require more of a ritualistic, ceremonial context where we're like taking communion together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's kind of that's like where we need to go.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? For it to also like make a difference, you know?
Yeah. It's like the concrete universal, as Hegel would put it, or maybe Desmond says it better, as the intimate universal.
Yeah.
It's like we're trying to arrive at the universal truth, but we're doing so in a way that is not, CS students would say it's not embodied. And in some ways, I think that's fair. It's not embodied.
What's that mean? We're walking.
Oh, well, I'm not talking about us.
Oh.
We're communing with the Godhead. But and in some ways that's what we were doing this morning too, in this dialogue. But there was also, I think...
You mean that engagement. Okay,
yeah.
I see.
There was also some confusion and some disagreement too. And so it's like, whoa, where's the underlying harmony here? Because if you're going to be taking communion together and partaking of the good, the true, the beautiful, which are just names for some one thing beyond being that can't be uttered, if we're going to commune in that, then we would agree that we're doing it. We wouldn't be in disagreement or discord. So that there was discord this morning, it was polite and everything, but somehow we weren't all eating of the same flesh and drinking of the same blood.
Yeah.
Which is part of the academic process at the end of the day. I mean, I guess we have the church for communion and we have the academy for discord.
Well, I mean, also like the space for refinement, you know?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, we have the academy for dialectics and we have the church for Eucharist. But but we would want to bring those two back together too.
Somehow. I don't know how.
So, yeah, I guess it's a question of God's relationship to creativity. Creativity is like Whitehead's version of being or substance. That ultimate substance, like the being that Kant said can't be predicated. It's presupposed by every predication, but cannot itself be attributed with any qualities. So all qualities are particular. Being is universal. But even to call it universal is to overstate what we can say, because the universals are abstract and being is not.
Mm-hmm.
Being is just being just is.
Yeah.
So when Whitehead refers to creativity, it's a big gesture of revolt, really, against a tradition. It's a revolt, at least in the poetics. He wants to perform this ultimate category in a different way, because he's accepting like a modern evolutionary cosmology.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everything that Aristotle and Plato had some intimations of it maybe, but the Aristotelian view just didn't grasp. It was a closed, finished cosmos, and we live in a cosmogenesis.
Yeah, I'm starting to understand better, like, the significance of the 20th century, especially, in this transformation of physics and also, like, mathematics, as I'm learning with, like, chaos theory and the Mandelbrot fractal discovery. He said all these, there's, like, these dust spins in mathematics, and Mandelbrot said he brought all these kind of, set on the shelf explorations in mathematics back out of the fringe. But yes, and this notion of dissipative structures, and it's really exciting, actually. I feel grateful to be living in an age that's not dominated by ideas of determinism and, mechanism, that it's, I mean, we still are experiencing that, but the kind of, I guess, novelty of our time is related to these new discoveries. And there are also reevaluations of things that the ancients, like Pythagoras and Plato and others, of the infinite and chaos that were, conceived negatively, exclusively, I think. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that's my limited understanding so far.
Yeah, well, I mean, in some ways, I think you could say that Giordano Bruno was really burned at the stake for his belief in the infinite.
I don't know much about
his validation of it. There's a whole list of,
but
heresies
that's
that the Inquisition wrote down.
The way he transformed our sense of the cosmos, right, as being full of other planets,
with intelligences
stars,
populating them.
Yeah, that it's just kind of really stupefying to think about someone all the way back then thinking that way.
He didn't just think about it.
But it would be
like
different than the way that people imagine it today, right? In some sense, because he was a Neoplatonist, right?
I mean, so are all the founders of quantum theory. So science is way more enchanted and enriched by the Western esoteric tradition than it seems.
I just mean he was further back in history, so he had more of the living kind of Aristotelian formal causality teleology alive in him compared to the scientists of this century. So I feel like his imagination of a cosmos full of other celestial bodies and intelligences would be very different from the way people imagine it today, because it's very materialist way.
Yeah, and also even though Whitehead's, I think, trying to break free of the Aristotelian closed cosmos, he's also inheriting Aristotle's organic vision of purpose and development.
But it's not so bad to lose all of it, right?
No, it just needs to be opened.
New discoveries too. Opened.
The great chain of being needs to be tilted from a vertical to not a horizontal, but to a spiralic integration of the horizontal and the vertical, so that there's an evolutionary unfolding, and that God in relation to creativity is always on a vector of becoming, and there's no finality. Eternity is process. Otherwise, it's not living, it's dead. If we want a living eternity, a divine eternity, in other words, then it needs to be creative.
I just feel like I had an insight. I was just thinking about how, just the for Barfield, for example, and others, the kind of familiar morphology of theories of the evolution of consciousness, describe this, Barfield says original participation. It's like a less differentiated experience, or being kind of united with the life of the world and the meaningfulness of the world, versus, and then this process of contraction and eventual alienation and individualizing the experience and kind of buffered self. And now there's these, reevaluations of classical physics and mathematics that lean towards, actually, indeterminism and non-linearity and emergence. So these are more related to human freedom. And so maybe, that's really interesting. Because it also affirms the livingness of the world more too. So I think that lends some credence to the, that morphology, that there is something to that. In the reevaluation of, received wisdom, and the ancient, I guess, devaluations of the infinite and disorder.
I think it's what's interesting
but
about...
in Western culture, not in all cultures.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess, Aristotle made room for the aberrant and the monstrous and the chaotic.
But
in the terrestrial and
it was like lower on a hierarchy, though.
Right. It was bad.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, even if he accounts for it, he, kind of basically makes it not a part of life.
Yeah, it's denigrated.
Walk over here.
Yeah. That's an interesting place to build a fort. Yeah, so I think we need to, when we talk about the divine, not think of it as just the unmoved mover who exists in perfect self-repose, untouched by the goings-on of the actual world. That's the Aristotelian vision, which is logically compelling, but emotionally it's like, oh, God's untouched?
Yeah.
God's...
That doesn't fly with the Christian feeling,
Well, the Christian feeling, no, but Christian theology has often been...
Oh, totally, yeah.
Very...
That's what Catherine Keller was criticizing.
Yeah. But if you look at actual practicing lay people, Christian people, they totally...
Yeah, that intuition.
With images of Mary and just Jesus as a very central being. And the intimacy of that relationship with Jesus and the disciples. And that is this feeling, of God being moved. And not being unmoving.
Yeah.
Not being unmoved. And self-moving. It's like, who wants a God that just sits around jerking off all day? That's basically what the thought thinking itself is doing.
That's funny.
It's not procreative,
Yeah.
It's not creative, period.
When I've imagined it, when I learned it, I could imagine it, almost like something rotating around itself, and it felt very isolated to me, and it didn't feel accurate.
And I should admit that Aristotle's view is probably deeper than we're characterizing it
of
now.
course.
So we're working with a caricature.
I'm also thinking of that kind of moment in Plotinus's emanation. But you can suspend it almost in eternity in your imagination.
Well, ultimately it returns.
Yeah.
All that pouring forth empties into matter, and matter is nothing, and so really indistinguishable from the one. And so it's just this loop. And so emanation, I think, gets us more movement than was present in Aristotle, but it's still a loop. It's a closed loop. Matter is denigrated, and there's no creative advance.
It's fallen, in a way.
Yeah.
It's the very bottom of the universe.
Yeah. It doesn't even have a bottom. It's so empty. It's just like an abyss.
Yeah, it's like nothingness, It's kind of like it just fades.
Right.
Into the shades, right?
Yeah.
Because nobody wants to go to the shades, the realm of the shades.
Yeah. So, the more I think about it, and I appreciate you humoring me to talk about this Whitehead stuff, Whitehead jargon, but it's a pretty profound question to ask.
It is, yeah.
Are there possibilities beyond God's imagination? And in some ways, Whitehead's saying, yeah, there are, but we can't know anything about them, because...
you think that's what he says?
Well, if creativity...
I don't know.
If creativity is, in a sense, logically prior to God, even though to define creativity, you have to say, well,
But maybe
conditions
it's like
itself.
Like a koan or something,
Yeah. Creativity is one, Whitehead says, echoing Plotinus, but it's also many. And so...
I guess I was also thinking earlier when you were describing God as finite, it reminded me of these arguments that I've encountered, that are very critical of the notion of God being like one of the finite furniture of the cosmos.
Right, but that's not what Whitehead's saying.
No? Okay.
No. Whitehead provides
God
for...
is constitutive.
Yeah, or the furniture of the universe is made probable by God's primordial limitation. And so that primordial ordering of the realm of possibilities or potentials is not itself a member of the universe, but rather constitutes the membership, the possibility of membership.
Yeah. But I would say God's also more than that.
Well, ultimately, the divine includes these different characters in Whitehead's Con.
Yeah. Okay.
Creativity, primordial nature, and consequent nature are like his trinity.
Yeah.
And it's a mystery you have to hold in your imagination at once and entertain and feel the relationship between these ideas.
You have to be in that trinity, that tension.
Yeah, so
the triangle. Yeah.
That's why I think that Whitehead really needs a practice. There needs to be a ritual dimension to his philosophy, because he's asking of us more than just logical comprehension and empirical verification. He's asking us to commune.
Oh, I've heard them.
Oh, there's the peacock.
I never saw it before, but I heard it.
I want to take a picture.